Hi guys, welcome back to Giant Talk, the world's first OKR podcast. Today Giant Talk is joined by Andy Binns, co-founder of Change Logic and corporate innovation guru. Today Andy is going to talk to us about innovation in the corporate world and how OKRs can be used to fuel innovation. Welcome to Giant Talk, Andy. It's great to have you with us for today's episode.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here and get to talk to your many listeners.
Thank you. So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. So as you say, I work with this firm, Change Logic, which is a small consulting firm that I co-founded 15 years ago with two business school professors, Mike Tushman from the Harvard Business School and Charles O'Reilly from Stanford. And together we have written a book called Corporate Explorer, How Corporations Beat Startups at the Innovation Game, which some people find a little controversial way of formulating things.
Mm-hmm. So let's start by talking about the concept of innovation and the types of innovation that you see.
Sure. So, and I think that's really a great way to start this conversation, Carly, with talking about different types of innovation, because to some degree, what you do, how you approach innovation does vary as to what sort of innovation you're talking about. There is enormous amounts of effort and action, sort of results that comes from incremental improvements to a business, optimizing the user traffic, the engagement that you get on your website, finding new features and functionality to an app, adding new partners to a service that you have. Some of them can have really big impacts on your business. The other sorts of innovation then start to move away from what you do today into new areas, either because there's new markets or because you add new capabilities. And it would be nice if this were a really hard, firm line between what's sort of incremental innovation in your core business and what is what we describe as explore innovation, things which start to move into higher levels of uncertainty. But there is no hard and fast line. But there comes a point where it is fundamentally different. And knowing when that you've crossed that point is a really big deal. Let me give you an example as to why. So the French advertising company, Havas, which is like one of the top 5 or 6 advertising companies in the world, they set out about 10 years ago to move into more digital forms of advertising. And in their case, one of the places they wanted to explore was how to use the crowd to engage creative talent, to use the many people who would be outside of their employees to come up with creative concepts to meet their various different clients. And they're working for like Evian Water and Harley Davidson and a load of major brands. And so they acquire a company called Victors and Spoils that does exactly this. It sort of moved the creative concepts out into the crowd, and they put the CEO of that business, John Windsor, in as the chief innovation officer of the company. Right. So this is a multi-billion-dollar company making a really big commitment to innovation. And at that moment, my colleague Mike Tushman from Harvard comes in and he does a video case study. There's a lesson here, which is never get caught on video by a Harvard business professor, because what happens is he goes round the launch meeting for this new innovation strategy is that people tell him the truth. The chief creative officer tells him, this is totally different from the craft that is involved in the creative art of advertising, right? And maybe it works occasionally, but really this is not the way you do advertising. This is a distraction. And so there comes a point when the organization will kill off innovation. Right? They're not usually as dramatic as the Havas. And incidentally, a few years later, the CEO loses his job. John Windsor leaves the company. The unit is closed down. Right. So, and I can tell you several other, bad stories like that. And so there comes a point when innovation starts to rub against the fundamentals of the business, and that's what causes a corporation to struggle when it comes to implementing its great ideas.
Thank you for that example, and for also touching on the different types of innovations. And it's not just so black and white, I guess.
Yeah.
And you talk about new ventures within a corporate setting. I know you've mentioned that.
Yeah.
In the book, can you give us some examples of those?
Yes, for sure. And I think this is where we know we're in the explore. When you're trying to set up a new revenue stream, often in an area that we might call disruptive, right? And this is to some degree business school jargon, because all it means is you're changing some of the rules of an industry. So a great example of this for me is what Christian Kurtish, a manager in the Hungarian business of the insurance company Unica. Right? This is a multi-billion-dollar insurance company in Austria serving Central and Eastern Europe. And Christian's off running the Hungary business, and he sees an opportunity. He says, hey, the insurance industry has changed. It used to be about pooling risk, right? And making it so that communities of people would support one another when times are difficult. It's become administering policies and catching your customers out when they try to steal your money. Right? It's like it's got upside down here. And so he comes up with a scheme for what he calls share risk, a digital platform for insurance where there is risk sharing, but there's also rewards back to the customers that they can then distribute into their community. Right? So share risk is a great example. It's scaling across Europe now. Another great example of one of these new ventures would be what Jim Peck did at LexisNexis. LexisNexis is sort of legal and news information, and that remains the case in most of the world. But about 20 years ago, it started LexisNexis Risk Analytics. Right? And what it did is it took its competence in managing public records data, and then it went and acquired some technology, and it sort of was able to link different data sets together. And it bought a company that had larger data sets, and it started to create this thing that we would now call big data analytics, right? And so this, by the way, is not that this is a British nationalism sort of thing for you and I here, but this is a British company, RELX, right? RELX based in London, and it owns LexisNexis, and they created out of their existing business unit a business unit that is now larger than the original, $2.5 billion of revenue in risk analytics. So many different types of ventures come out of this way, led by these characters that we'll talk about.
Yeah, and just moving on to those characters, that was going to be my next point. So when we spoke previously before the podcast, you mentioned a concept which was new to me, and that's the idea of corporate explorer. So what does this mean, and how does a corporate explorer differ from an entrepreneur? Yeah,
it's interesting, isn't it, Carly, that we have a very strong image in our minds of an entrepreneur.
Yeah,
right. We know Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs. I do work with pro bono work with the Atlanta Opera Company, and they've got an opera about Steve Jobs on at the moment, right? So these people become legend, right? Steve Jobs, Jeff Bezos, all of these different characters. And yet we imagine that corporate innovation just kind of happens through labs and accelerators and innovation programs and hackathons and whatever. Well, it doesn't. It actually happens for the same reason, that somewhere there's an individual who has the passion, the commitment, the energy to inspire innovation in the company and to mobilize others around them. The thing is, they're different. Whereas an entrepreneur is often, and this is why they have operas made about them, a somewhat difficult individual, sometimes very fond of getting attention. The corporate explorer is different. they make others in the company feel that they've made them successful. They're sort of lower they're higher, in humility, and they attract others around them, and they build support for what they're doing rather than needing to be the genius in the room all the time. And so there's a different kind of profile of the corporate explorer than the entrepreneur. But the thing that unites them is this commitment to solving a customer problem, to really having that intensity around the impact that they're going to have in the world.
It's interesting to see the difference and to hear the difference, as you've just explained. So you mentioned a couple of the characteristics of the passion and commitment. Are there any other traits of a corporate explorer that you can?
Yeah, I think part of this, and I think passion, commitment, and humility really, really important. But I will highlight a couple more things, because you're right. Sort of, finding these people is kind of part of the story here. Is organizations need to identify who these corporate explorers are, give them the space, because sometimes they're unlikely heroes, right? If you meet Christian Kurtish or at Deloitte, the big consulting firm, Balaji Bondili, who's also built this really impressive business, which is changing the consulting professional services model. They're not, high attention. They're not arrogant characters. You'll be surprised to discover their achievements somewhat, right? They're impressive, they're personable, but they're not the characters we expect to be the great innovators in some ways. So there's something about humility that's really significant. But there's also something about them being socially connected. They have social capital in the organization. They know what happens, how things are done, who's who, and they can ask for favors. They can get people to be their allies, to be sort of advocates for them when times are difficult. And that sometimes, Carly, is what you need when you're fighting against what is undoubtedly a sort of a tough a tough story when it comes to corporate innovation, because we haven't talked about this, but it's you've got to acknowledge that corporations are tough places to do this in, right? There's many reasons, even a small one gets sort of wrapped up in its own way of doing things and its own rules and routines, and the more successful you become, the more those routines and practices and what we tend to call culture gets kind of gets hardened, right? Because it actually leads to success. It's like a good thing. It makes you bigger and bigger and bigger, more and more successful. And then there comes a point when it's so strong that actually it makes it difficult to change. And so, if you think of, you've probably seen this picture, we have a rug upstairs that has this of fish all flowing in one direction. And then there's one fish in the middle flowing the other way. Mm-hmm. That's the corporate explorer, right? They're sort of going against the tide very often, doing something that's really quite different. And that I think is part of what you see. So there's a resilience to the corporate explorer, and a willingness not to have to be liked, right? You don't get to this role by being friendly and warming people, because you are going against the norms, going against the way things have always been done.
It's good to look at those traits that you've mentioned, the characteristics, and to be able to identify those corporate explorers. So I wonder if that's got anyone's sort of brain ticking now in their own organisations. So we've spoken about the different innovations and different types of new ventures within a corporate setting. I was trying to bring OKRs into the frame here and talk about how OKRs can be used to fuel innovation.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think OKRs really have a key role in some incredibly important ways. And we don't, I must admit, we do not talk explicitly about the role of OKRs in our book, Corporate Explorer. But I think the link is very clear in what I'm going to talk about, because let me put it this way: one of the questions we wrestle with is, have corporate explorers always been there, right, or has something changed? because mostly our story about corporate innovation is that it's really hard to do and it doesn't happen very often. And we know the stories of like Nokia, BlackBerry, Blockbuster Video, Kodak, on and on and on and on, companies that go out of business, right? Because they can't make the sort of change, the sort of innovation that we're discussing. And but that started to change. You see Microsoft managing to reinvent itself with Office 365, going to a SaaS-based platform for its Exchange servers. You see NVIDIA, the technology giants, managing to move out of processors for computers into cars, deep computing, AI, and all sorts of things. So there's a number of trends that have shifted, and in each of these stories there are corporate explorers. So what has changed? And I think OKRs are a part of the story that has changed, and part of the reason why they can be more successful. And in the book we talk about innovation as being about ideation, incubation, and scaling. Right? Ideation, generating new ideas, incubation, testing them, scaling, turning them into sustainable revenue streams. And I think OKRs have a pivotal role to play particularly in incubation. Why? Because incubation is all about evidence. It's all about results. It's all about measurement and having a really strict sort of regime to how you do this. And that's not typically what happens in a corporation, right? They've used to develop in a far more annual plan kind of way, and let's work on this with a set of performance objectives that you have as an individual, Carly, and we'll come and we'll tell you how you did over the last year about performance you can't remember, and it's got nothing to do with the person sitting next to you. And whereas I think what OKRs bring is that team concept, it brings that outcome focus, and it's shorter timeframes, and it connects to what we're trying to get done as a team overall or as an organization overall. And so that can have a tremendous, that does play a tremendous role in some of the stories that we tell in the book, because it shifts a company's perspective about how to use evidence in deciding what to do next. Their biggest danger is just inertia, just continuing on doing the same things. And OKRs are a way of making it much more evidence-based so that you're in a position where you can make choices, right? Because corporate innovation needs to be about small steps learning, and then investing when you're sure that you've got something that's worth it. And OKRs are a part of that regime, I think.
Yeah, and I think with OKRs sort of acting as a stretch goals, and you want to keep striving for best. And I think OKRs and innovation go hand in hand. And I think OKRs give a safe space for people to express their thoughts and ideas and that creativity that comes with innovation. So I think there's definitely a lot of benefits to using OKRs to fuel that innovation. But as with most things, OKRs can come with some challenges. Are there any challenges to using OKRs to drive innovation?
Just before we get into that exactly, I realized when you just said, this sort of piece about creativity, and I agree with you. And there's, one of the things about I've found about Agile as a overall method is that there are people who believe that it is about entirely autonomous teams doing whatever they need to do, whatever they self-determined teams. And I think that that's really wrong. I don't think that most of the time that contributes to innovation, because what it does is it doesn't create any tension around the strategy. It doesn't create any tension about the customer problem you're solving. And I think OKRs are a part of the way of allowing freedom and autonomy, which you absolutely need, but within boundaries. And it creates a system of accountability as well as the sort of the freedom and creativity that you describe. And that balance is so critical to strike. And I think OKRs are part of the story that does that. So here the challenge is almost the flip side, right? Which is that, OKRs are great at keeping you focused, but you can get over-focused. And you might lose, and you do lose sight. I have clients where they lose sight of what's the big ambition here, what's the shift we're trying to make, right? So one client is trying to make a big shift in healthcare, and they have some bold ambitions. They've identified changes in the world that they want to make. How we tend to do with firms a sort of ecosystem analysis. So you want to play in this part of the market, and you see money being spent on the following different things. In healthcare, we tend to split it between getting healthy and staying healthy, right? And then what's the customer journey in getting healthy and staying healthy, and where do they struggle? And so our client identified a bunch of different places where they struggle. And one of the things that I observed as they got deeply into their projects of pursuing the different opportunities they identified is that actually the OKRs kind of got them focused on the day-to-day, and they forgot about the big ambition. And I think that I've seen that replicated in a couple of other places. So you kind of got to also, and I don't think that's the intention of OKRs. That's not the way that it is laid out, but it can happen because almost the power of driving you forward on the focus, right, can actually lose you on the longer term as well.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. I think it's easy to see how you can get sort of wrapped up in the day-to-day and forget that ambition and the innovations that you're trying to reach. What I would like to do is to end on a final piece of advice or a lasting tip for our listeners. It's quite a broad question here, but if you can share some advice to anyone listening for a successful innovation strategy or a tip, what would you say to them? Or anyone looking at in a corporate setting and thinking about a new venture.
Don't focus on the ideas. What is he talking about, right? Surely innovation is all about ideas. And here's what I mean. Ideas can become a drug, right? It's really fun to generate new ideas and to be creative and to see the possibilities. And as human beings, we get really excited by that. The thing is, innovation is about ideas applied, things that actually happen, that have an impact on people, have an impact on the world, have an impact on revenue. And so you need to see innovation as being really about this ideation, incubation, and scaling, which is part of what we talk about in Corporate Explorer. And one way to do that is to think about how you generate ideas a little differently than is often the case. And in the book, we talk about having hunting zones, right? Because what you want to do is to decide where in the world could we make an impact, right? Where are there people spending money to solve a problem, but that we could solve better? Or is there a cluster of problems we think we can make a difference to? And so for a corporation, that becomes a hunting zone. We have a client at the moment that has hunting zones like use of automation in factories. They have another one which is the use of data in healthcare. Right. So spaces in the world that you think there are a set of problems that the solutions you have might be able to make a difference to. And then think about your work of innovation as what are the most important customer problems there? And how do I trial lots of experiments around that? And having a few boundaries allows that creativity, and innovation, of course, is about ideas, really. But putting some boundaries around it means that you're more likely to get it done. And you're more likely, if you're in a corporate setting, to get it invested in, right? Because it connects to a strategy that is going to add up to something that matters to the corporation. The biggest danger or flaw that I find in corporate innovation is that firms spend too much money too early in projects and dig a big hole that they can't get out of, because to admit that it's never going to work and that they've misunderstood the customer problem or somebody else has a solution that's better than theirs, it's really tough to do. And so you get around that if you're much more committed to having clear vision on the hunting zones and then getting into this experiment story with some discipline.
So don't focus on the ideas. That sounds like a good title for a new book.
That'll be my follow-up to Corporate Explorer. How's that?
Edition 2. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really interesting to talk to you and to delve into innovation and corporate ventures, and also the concept that's new to me. It might be new to some of our listeners of the Corporate Explorer. and how they differ, and the different sort of traits and characteristics of a corporate explorer to an entrepreneur, and I guess innovations in looking at startups as opposed to in corporate world. So it's been really interesting. So thank you, and for sharing lots of examples as well. It's always good to hear examples. It kind of paints the picture a little bit better. Thank you. Thanks, Andy. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for another episode of Giant Talk. As always, if you have any feedback or if there's anything you'd like to hear on Giant Talk, you can get in touch with us at growth@therebegiants.com. Thank you.